Welcome to episode 3 of the Ball Habat. We're here talking Max basketball, and I am joined, as usual, by the grizzled vet, former Mac, the master of disaster himself, Natan Cohn, and we got with us resident stathead, aka the professor, aka the Admor of analytics, Rabbeinu Shua Shlita, and of course there's myself, bandwagon Max fan par excellence, one half of the bandwagon boys, along with Simi Cohn, will be joining us next time. I am Ari Lamb, and of course, as always, we have the one and only, the mighty, mighty Mayor Wiesel on the ones and twos, engineering us to the moon. And as Mayor always tells me to tell you, please like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. And guys, we got a packed show for you here. And as if that weren't enough, we have with us the lead columnist for D3Hoops.com, D3 men's basketball top 25 voter, the legend, one of the smartest voices out there commenting on Division III basketball. We got Ryan Scott with us, Awesemo 3000, and we're going to break down the upcoming game and so much more. So without further ado, Ryan, my man, whip out that kippah, because you, my friend, are now an official member of the Balabatim. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. I felt a little jealous that Bob was on there, and so I'm glad we were able to work this out.
Well, listen, Bob's got connections everywhere. I don't know what to say. He's just all over the place. He's like, he's basically the chief rabbi of the Jews at this point. It's awesome. So, Ryan, you are for anyone who's been following D3 certainly for a long time, but even like folks like myself, Simi, who hopefully you'll meet in a future show, who are just getting to know D3 now, you are really one of the main points of entry for us into this world, because you're just you're like a total D3 savant. So how did you get into D3 basketball? What's your origin story?
Well, way back, to date myself, my freshman year at Eastern Nazarene College, January of 2000, our women's basketball team was doing pretty good, and we were at a school that was aspirational to even think we could win a conference title, let alone do anything like go into the tournament. And I'm a big sports head, and so I was trying to find any information about what is the Division III NCAA tournament going to look like, how do you get in, what are the deals, and there's only one website, even back in the year 2000, that you could find it. So I found my way to the message boards, and I was pretty active on there through college and then in grad school afterwards, and just kind of continued to worm my way into things, and got Pat's ear and started writing a regional column for a while, and then got bumped up a few years back to the Around the Nation column.
So you're like, you're just someone who just does these deep dives, right? How did you, like I'm never going to a Ryan Scott column being like, all right, this is going to be like a quick 30-second skim, right? Like you're always going deep. How did you get attracted to that kind of writing?
Well, back in the day, we had regional columns that would highlight basically one team per region each week. That would really just kind of be a short 600-word, just summary of how the team's doing, who the best players are, get a few quotes. And so when I moved over to Around the Nation, Pat really wanted to differentiate the national column from the regional ones. And so he said, basically every column, try to have men and women in there, make sure that you're getting multiple schools, issues that are not just, pertinent to one area of the country, one team, one program. Make sure we're talking about things that really have some meat and some depth to them. And I love doing that. It's hard work. It's a lot harder than you'd think, especially when we're not trying not to rerun the same themes every single year. But I love doing it. I love talking to all the coaches and getting to meet people and talk to everybody. It's just so much fun.
That was a big interest of mine when I, again, started reading and even learning, right? Like, okay, great, yeshiva's now mentioned, but what world are they mentioned in, right? How do we talk about them as a player? I knew my sort of area, but I think being open to the world, how open are the coaches and other talent to be able to like talk to you? Like, is it really easy to open that door because there's not so many people scrambling, or what is that like, right? When you reach out and sort of want to, hey, look, I want to do a deep dive. What is that like?
I don't think I've ever had a hard time getting in touch with somebody. The SIDs are really good about it. But what we have to remember at the Division III level is this kind of coverage is really big for them for recruiting, because a lot of these teams are recruiting against a Division II school that might be able to give a little bit of money, or, maybe some even low level D1s. And you can say, you're going to get national coverage. If you come here to this school and we're a good team and we're contending, you're going to get, interviews on the Hoopsville show. You're going to get columns that talk about us. And there's nothing like D3 hoops for Division II basketball. And it makes a big deal to a lot of these programs. The coaches, they're willing to support when we ask for help. They're willing to do that because it really does make a big difference to these schools that they're getting the kind of coverage that guys are maybe craving looking at higher levels.
Yeah, won't necessarily get tweeted by NBA or ESPN, but you'll get some coverage on D3 Hoops.
Yeah,
that's really been wild, and that actually kind of it kind of makes me think, one of the cool things about, about coming into this coming into the D3 world as like a YU fan is just like seeing how kind of like YU fits into this world. It's the sort of thing where, growing up, I didn't usually associate kind of like YU basketball with the kind of, level of competition that it has now. And it could be that it was on that trajectory, but you actually were one of the first people outside of the kind of smaller Max universe to spot what was going on. So kind of what drew your attention to this? Like how did YU even get on your radar?
Yeah, who tipped you off?
Right.
So
who's like, hey, the Jews are playing basketball.
I was able to go to the NCAA tournament game that the team qualified for at York, Pennsylvania, a couple of years back. And, I was able to watch the game, and there was all the kind of hubbub about who was able to play and eligibility and all that good stuff. But it was pretty clear to me. I mean, obviously that team was not at the level that this team is, but you could see that there were 4 guys who belonged on that court. There were 4 guys who were at a tournament level that you could see, and they were young. And so that's what kind of piqued my interest to say, all right, this team, you knew Elliot was putting something together. He had big aspirations, and he had brought in a few guys that were really talented, that were starting to build this and create a reputation. And so, of course, I was just going to watch and see what happened. And lucky enough, they made the trip down to Washington College, which is the closest Division III school to my house. And so I was able to go down there, and it was really watching the warm-ups. I mean, to me, the first thing I said is I texted Pat right away, and I was like, Gabe Leifer is a giant. Like, this guy is huge. Like, his arms are gigantic. Like, he's a legit player. He's not going to get bullied and pushed around by anybody. And by that point, I think Reef was a freshman, and it was easy to see that he was, I kept telling them, this is the best freshman we have in the country easily, just with the skills that he brought in right from the beginning. And you could see that there was depth at that point, right? That those guys, not only were really good, talented players, but they were guys coming off the bench who weren't going to give up too much and be able to keep it going. And obviously they continued to bring in recruits, and it just gets deeper and deeper. And that's what I've told everybody who's been a doubter. Bob is a fan because I told him, I said, just watch a few games, and the way that the Max play basketball, if you watch it, I haven't yet to find someone who isn't a convert, at least to say that they're a legitimate team, right?
So Gabe Leifer, by the way, he's like the Mark III model of a Jew. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like they bulked up.
Gabe.
They bulked up the Iron Man suit.
He doesn't lift. Gabe does not lift weights. Insider info.
He lifts towers. It's Hagba.
All natural. He does Hagba.
A lot of books carry.
Exactly.
To a curriculum.
Oh my
God!
I
think what's one of the things you talked about and seeing the maturity. You talked about sort of the eye test, right? That's what we talk about, obviously, without the matchups, whether it's the proactive choice or the reactive choice, right? Because there hasn't been that top national level, right, opponent that they've played against. We talk about the eye test. What does the eye test miss? Like, for you as a voter, what how far can it take you? What are some of the things and challenges that you come up against, or even as you share that with other voters? What are some of the conversations that happen back and forth?
I mean, the level of competition is one, and that's what we'll talk about eventually when we get to Williams too. There's only so much you can tell from the skills you see, when you're up 30 points. And so you really, when it comes to eye test, you got to see that they're playing against opponents that and you can use as kind of a measuring stick. And I do think there is a huge difference seeing a team in person versus seeing them on the live stream. Obviously, it's so much nicer now than it was 15 years ago that we can actually watch pretty much every game across the country, on video, which is better than nothing. But there really is a difference seeing these teams in person and seeing what they can do and the size, because you really can't tell how big somebody is on a live stream in the same way that you can when you see them in person.
You actually, this just occurred to me now as you were talking. You actually were probably one of the first people like outside the Skyline conference to really notice probably Ryan Terrell, because you saw him playing when he was still just a sophomore at York. Like what like when you come down and you say the first thing that strikes you is Leifer is huge, but what were your first impressions of Terrell when you saw him? He's like a lanky sophomore guard. Like what are your first impressions?
Well, I mean, originally, and I think, I don't know that people recognize just how much he's added to his game every year too. I mean, as a a freshman, really what was just surprising is he had a handle and he was 6'7", right? He was the point guard, but he's also the tallest guy on the floor. And, you know, we don't get 6'4" point guards that often in D3, let alone 6'7", right? And so you say, well, here's a guy who can handle the ball. He's a really good passer. That's the thing that I noticed the most in freshmen is the guys who feel like they belong on the court. They know how to make the right decisions. You don't get a lot of freshmen like that. And Ryan was really able to do it. And then, man, we came back one year and it looked like he'd added 40 pounds of muscle the next year. And then he's added a 3-point shot that's a lot better than it used to be. And he just keeps getting better and better. But that's another thing with the Max is having to prove it. Like his freshman year, I was telling everybody, we have to make this guy National Rookie of the Year. Like he's the best player. We have to do it. But, you know, Yeshiva didn't have the best record that year playing in the Skyline Conference. And you got somebody like Anders Nelson won it that year, who was at St. Thomas, perennial power, really good player. And it really is some of that having to get the competition, you know, that people need to see you beating good teams and not just, you know, somebody by 40 points.
Was the eye-opening moment the tournament, even though it was a COVID shortened, you know, tournament, you know, whether it was for Terrell or even for the Max overall, was it the tournament, you know, about, you know, almost 2 years ago? Was that really the moment where sort of they sort of jumped the shark for the rest of D3?
Well, I mean, WPI has a decades-long reputation of being one of the best defensive teams that we have. Even when they're not, you know, a top 25 team, they always have one of the hardest defenses to play against. And Yeshiva just ripped them apart. And I think that made a big difference for people who've been watching a long time, to know that they were legit. Because if there was going to be a way to stop them, WPI would have found it. Even if Yeshiva was going to win the game, to win it the way that they did really gave a lot of credence to what they were doing there. Obviously, the big streak, it doesn't matter who you're playing. 50 games in a row is 50 games in a row. Like, you know, being able to work through that, you know, it's good. But having a team like WPI and showing that your offense can really just destroy that defense, it was really important.
So one of the things that we've kind of all been inaugurated into the Max universe, and not that I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with this already, but, you know, for me as kind of a new fan, it was like the top 25. I mean, I didn't ever think that YU would sniff the top 25, let alone the top 10, let alone top 5, let alone the number ones. I don't even want to say it. I'm not even going to say it, you know, like poo, Blanar. So you are one of the kind of voters for the top 25 poll. First of all, what does it take to become a top 25 voter? What is that process like?
Well, I mean, I was asked at some point, the way that our top 25 works there, well, we're having to rejigger it a little bit because we have more regions now. For a long time, it was 8 regions, and there were 3 voters from each region. And then Pat Coleman, our owner, was the 25th vote. We're having to move that around a little bit. He balances it out between coaches and usually SIDs, or if there's some media members who are definitely watching more than just their own team, they'll have a chance to be in there. But really, we're just looking for people who are going to watch games and take it seriously and not just be homers. And
well, I'm out. so you, if I'm not mistaken, I think sure you pointed this out to me that you, Ryan, were, I think, the first top 25 vote that Yeshiva ever got. When was it the WPI game where other people started to kind of, receive that message and get it, or was it a little bit later?
I mean, I think that was sort of the last straw for most of the holdouts, right? You have to remind me, was it the preseason, that 1920 year that I voted them 25th? I think that was.
Yeah, and then they lost accidentally.
I tend to.
That's how we roll.
Yeah, I tend to early in the season try to use those last couple slots for teams that maybe are not on the radar, because I think some voters, once they're getting a vote, will actually take a little bit deeper look at some of those teams. And I just knew the potential the team had coming in, right? It was a team we had seen before, and I knew how good Ryan Terrell was. Just because the record hadn't been great the year before, you're bringing almost everybody back, bringing in some great talent, and I like to think that I watch as many, if not more, games than anybody else, and I like to think I'm pretty good at picking out these teams ahead of time. So, but I know the WPI game was a big one for a lot of people. And then just the big loss and not getting that Randolph-Macon game. We're already in the arena. I had my car gassed up and ready to drive down there. That would have been the difference, right? Even if they lost that game, but it had been single digits or something like that, that would have skyrocketed them up to the top in a way that we haven't seen until this year.
Yeah, I think that's the hype coming in right on the game tomorrow night. Because we are talking about this a little beforehand. They haven't played yet, or else we'd be either crying or cheering or running away about whatever happened. But that's what this game has become to a certain respect. Is the game, right? The Randolph Macon game that never happened, right? The real top competition and proof. But you mentioned something that I want to touch upon and see if you saw the same thing. We've been talking a lot about how it's not about what happened 2 years ago, the maturity, like you said, of Ryan, but also of OFEC, of some of these guys are just playing at a significantly higher level than they were playing, even when they were successful 2 years ago, last year, and in the beginning of this season, you've seen some really impressive performances individual, but also being able to understand their role in the team, and then just the pieces outside. So, what do you see in this YU team, versus the other team that says it's not just about the litmus test? They actually may be one of the legitimate contenders, for the whole thing, which
Yeah.
is crazy.
Well, and that's the thing people don't understand about Division III basketball, right? We've got 420 teams, and there are probably 100 in any given year that have the talent on the floor to win a national title. People might laugh at me that I have a number that big, but at talent-wise, there are 100 teams that can do it. But what it comes down to is consistency, doing it every single night, and that they're getting the most out of the team. And that's really what anybody is looking for in a game like Illinois Wesleyan, or playing St. Joseph last year, Williams coming up. These kinds of teams are teams that are going to force you to play 40 minutes, and that's where you really see the separation. Because out of those 100 teams, there's 90 of them that can't put 40 minutes together, right? They might be able to do 30 or 35, but it's those last 5 minutes that are the difference between, a champion and somebody who's not even ranked at the end of the year. And that's where it's not just eye test, right? You got to have a team where it's close, where you've got close games, where you're forced to not make mistakes, right? That's the number one thing we talk about when we see the Max or any detractors, is that they've rarely been in a game where their mistakes come back to haunt them.
So
right, from an opponent standpoint or otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think any conversation about the Max has to start with the motion offense. So what does this offense bring to D3 that is either unique or at least special that other teams might have a hard time contending with?
I can only talk secondhand because I am not as basketball savant as a lot of these other guys, and I don't see things. If I did, I would probably be a coach. But the thing that I get is talking to coaches. I've not heard a single coach who said anything other than, I don't know how you stop that. I don't know how you guard that. I don't know how you tell what they're doing. There's so many options in this motion offense. There's so many decisions being made, and so many guys who are so ingrained in the system to really know how to play it, that it's just very difficult. I'm so interested to see how some of these really good coaches approach it. Because it's not just like, you can figure out a few plays and stop, Ryan Terrell doing this or stop Gabe Leifer doing that, because the options are there, and you stop one person, somebody else is ready to go. And I've just heard over and over the coaches say, we don't know how to prepare for this. There's not really a great way to do this.
I mean,
do you see this kind of offense? It's interesting. When we're talking with Bob, he talked about the IWU offense, right, as similar, right, at least in terms of the motion and the way they approach. Most of the film that we see, whether it's Williams or other teams in the top 25, tends to be more traditional pick and roll, post up, sort of move the ball around, not as much of the motion. Is it just, in game you make your adjustments outside of YU specific offense, or how do you think they approach?
Well, I think a lot of the teams that are doing offense really well are using some form of motion offense, but usually there's 3 or 4 outcomes that they're hoping for, right? We're doing the motion in order to find ourselves in one of these 3 or 4 places. And you just don't see that same kind of look out of Yeshiva, right? They may be looking for 10 or 12 different offensive options, right? Shots and passes and things that they're going for. And it just makes it a little more complicated. I mean, that is the one thing with Illinois Wesleyan or some of these teams, like a Marietta, Randolph Macon, they're running very specific things and they're looking for different options, but you can kind of tell where they're headed, and you can kind of try to take 1 or 2 or 3 things away from them and make them work. And you just don't see the openings to do that at Yeshiva. The guys are such good passers, and they know where the ball's supposed to be and what their roles are. It just makes it that much harder to guard.
you have to make choices, meaning there are too many options that you can't try to stop everything, right? You have to either decide between Ryan's going to get his 30 and I'm going to focus on some of the other players, right? Even this year, we're seeing Gabe scoring down, right? And his facilitating. One of the things you watch from watching Wash U and IWU, which I think teams can potentially employ against YU, is limit the touches, right? Make it hard for Gabe to get touches and then see what happens when the ball stays around the outside. Ryan will probably still get his, but how does that affect the back cuts for OFEC and other folks, right? You have to be able to pick your poison and decide in terms of how your team is made up and where your strengths are, how you're going to get them to play to the strengths on defense. I know Shua has some thoughts as well as some of the weaknesses in terms of why you may be able to exploit, but you want to jump in, Shua?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done to limit touches for Gabe because like he gets the ball right in the middle of the court, and if you want to limit those touches, you're gonna have. We saw it a couple games ago. They employed like a 1-3-1 where they collapse on anybody getting the ball in the high post, but that leaves the back door cuts open and it leaves shooters open, and YU happens to have a shooter who's shooting over 50%, basically 50% from three for his career in Eitan. They have Ofek, who's just a great cutter and finisher at the rim. And so it's very difficult. It's a pick your poison. It's very difficult to do so. If I was a coach who had to defend against YU, I would have a lot of trouble. I cannot begin to think about how I would guard this team.
Just to transition for a second back to, I think, a point we made in the times that we're living in, because it's interesting to us in general. But want to understand the impact as a voter. He talked about, right? We want to see Williams. I think we had all planned to be watching Williams earlier today. In some respect or another, they were going to play York. It was going to be right now. Everybody's rescheduling games. Everyone's scrambling to find matchups. Everyone's there. How does that impact as a voter, right? Matchups that you were hoping going to see, matchups that you were hoping going to be able to solidify or change that top 25 and beyond or regional rankings. Does it just say, hey, didn't happen, can't count it? Or how does it change that body of work as a voter?
I mean, as a top 25 voter, it's not a whole lot of difference because you either have a game or you don't, right? I mean, as a fan, I want to see some of these games. You're not seeing Marietta and St. Joseph was a huge disappointment, right? Because those are two really good teams. It'd be a good barometer for where they're both at. But for me as a voter, I mean, that's one good game they don't have, but there's a lot of games that are relatively forgettable on a lot of these schedules. The big place where it will come in is when it gets down to selection time and regional rankings, because that's a cross-regional game that both of those schools are going to miss, right? And those regional wins, whoever got the win from that game was going to get a regional win against a really good team, which shows up in the criteria, and it's really important. If one team's got 5 regional wins versus one that's got 2 or 3, that makes a huge difference in those regional rankings. And that matters in terms of hosting. It obviously matters who gets in when you're down towards the 15th, 16th, 17th at-large slots. And so those teams really want to get those games in. But at this point, you're really just trying to get better to win your conference.
Anyway, final thoughts. If you would honor us, Ryan, having watched this kind of iteration of the Max team, that's been really exciting. Obviously for us as Yeshiva fans, but for you as a D3 fan, what does YU emerging like this do for D3? Negative, positive. What's the overall picture as a D3 fan?
Well, I mean, the number one thing we know as D3 fans that nobody else does is how quality the teams are, how good the competition is. We're getting a very unique situation this year, having St. Thomas move directly from D3 to D1. And I think they're awesome 500 story. Right
they're
now.
They're holding their own, 500.
Right, and they're playing the same 5 starters that they played last year, and that team didn't even finish ranked number 1, right? They probably would be, 1, 2, 3 right along with Yeshiva this year. But the fact that, being in New York, the Jewish school, like there's all these other storylines that come into play that are really grabbing the attention of places, getting the tweets from the NBA and from ESPN that are going to draw attention, yes, to Yeshiva, but that in turn is going to draw attention to just the quality we have across D3. I've always said there's a real market there. I think there are going to be people who didn't even go to these schools who really appreciate the D3 story. The fact that these are real student athletes, they're paying tuition, they're going to class, and it's the college basketball that I think college basketball fans want, that I don't think D1 is delivering anymore. And so the attention that Yeshiva gets is going to be good for everybody, right? And it just, just added pressure for the team, right? That they have to keep winning to keep getting this attention. And it's not just them, it's everybody else riding this too. So in some sense, we want them to lose. In some sense, we want them to win, right? That's the national picture, right? The team on top, you're always rooting against, but at the same time, it's good for everybody that they're winning.
I love it. That's amazing. Natan, Shua, any closing, any bits of closing wisdom for the Chevra?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, like I said, every time we have a discussion like this, and hopefully the audience feels it too, it's about belonging, right? Meaning understanding not just belonging from the sense of, hey, it's great that YU can now be here, but understanding there was a community to be a part of all along. And I think that's the really important thing. I think we talked about it in terms of D3 feels not just the playing, not just in terms of the play, feels like college basketball as it was meant to be, but it's the brotherhood of the people in the business, people saying yes, right? How can we help? That you don't necessarily see everywhere, right? You sometimes see like, what does it do for me kind of thing. People are just helping. And I think that this community has so many, like any of our communities around the neighborhood, right? There's just so many opportunities to jump in, showcase and help and really broaden the appeal and the effect for everyone. And I think, love what Ryan's bringing, not just here, but across the board. Again, followed him for years, just reading and getting to know that community and sort of opening up. So Ryan, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us.
Absolutely. Is a total privilege. Ryan, I don't know if you know, but Jews across the world, this weekend on the Sabbath, we read from the book of Exodus. And so, obviously that's your pastor yourself, that's just the beginning of a great journey. And this has felt like the beginning of an amazing journey. And so we're just incredibly honored that you're joining us and you've taken the time to just goof around with a bunch of lunatics like us. Please subscribe the Balabatan channel on YouTube. We're going to be recapping every game right after every game. We're going to be doing some fun preview episodes like this before some of the bigger games. We're going to bring on all the highlights, all the legends. We had Bob, we have Ryan. I mean, that's half of Mount Rushmore right there. This is going to be just a tremendous amount of fun. And Ryan, thank you again so much for being with us.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. I love talking basketball with whoever wants to have a conversation, and especially D3. And I love this story, and I want to see him keep winning.
Unbelievable. You guys, the Jews are good at basketball again. Let's do this. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Ball.
Thank you, Shua, for making it happen. Appreciate it, guys.